Police can ask to search your bag on a bus even if they don't suspect that you're doing anything wrong, but only if a reasonable person in your shoes would feel free to say no. So you're on an overnight Greyhound bus. Long ride, slightly questionable air circulation. You've mentally committed to not making eye contact with anyone. You make a stop at a bus station, and just before you're about to depart from there, 2 police officers board the bus. Badges, one visibly armed, they start walking down the aisle. And then they stop at your seat.
Mind if we check your bag for drugs?
Are you free to decline? That question is what the Supreme Court had to answer in the 1991 case of Florida v. Bostick. And here's the specific legal question presented. Does the Fourth Amendment get violated when police, without any individualized suspicion, board a bus, question passengers, and obtain consent to search luggage? Is that automatically a seizure by virtue of the fact that it took place on a bus that was about to depart, or is it still voluntary? So on August 27, 1985, Terrence Bostick was riding a bus from Miami to Atlanta. The route had multiple scheduled stops along the way, including one in Fort Lauderdale. Routine. Passengers get on, passengers get off, keep it moving. Enter, literally, the Broward County Sheriff's Department. At the time, Florida law enforcement was heavily engaged in drug interdiction. The sheriff's office had implemented a program wherein officers would board buses during scheduled stops and ask passengers for consent to search their luggage. This wasn't based on any specific suspicion, it wasn't based on tips from informants or some other particular suspicious activity, just random sweeps. So 2 officers boarded Bostick's bus. The Florida Supreme Court described it like this: 2 officers, complete with badges, insignia, and one of them holding a recognizable zipper pouch containing a pistol, boarded a bus. Now pause there. Courts are frequently tasked with reviewing interactions between police and citizens to evaluate the constitutionality of that encounter. While these reviews are evaluated based on the totality of the circumstances, they often turn on a single factor, which, if not present, could flip the entire analysis. Courts also have the benefit of slowing everything down to analyze the interaction moment by moment, essentially by freeze frame. So let's take it here one by one. The officers were armed. Shocking. But, and this becomes important to the court, that gun stayed in the pouch. It was not drawn, it was not pointed, it was not waved around like a Broadway prop, it was not used in any sort of threatening or even authoritative way, it was just possessed. The officers approach Bostick, they asked to see his ticket and ID. Everything checks out. Then they explain, "We're narcotics officers looking for drugs." Followed up by the question, "May we search your luggage?" One key factual dispute is whether they told him he had the right to refuse. Bostick says maybe not, but the trial court resolved that dispute in favor of the state, the prosecution, the police. Meaning, for legal purposes, we and the Supreme Court have to assume they did tell him he could refuse. Nonetheless, Bostick told them they could search his bag. They searched, they found cocaine. He was arrested for trafficking. Let's first acknowledge the elephant in the room. Bro, what are you doing? You have cocaine in your bag. This must be his first rodeo, and quite possibly his last. Now, before trial, Bostick's lawyers filed a motion to suppress. This is an evidentiary hearing presented solely to the judge, no jury. In moving to suppress, Bostick essentially asked the court to prevent the introduction of any evidence related to the cocaine that was recovered because it was obtained, as they argued, in violation of the Fourth Amendment. A key point here by way of context is that the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution provides in relevant part that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. Essentially, the Fourth Amendment protects people from unreasonable police searches and seizures. If the police unlawfully seize an individual, the evidence obtained during that seizure, like, drugs in a suitcase, could be suppressed, meaning prohibited from being introduced into evidence. And if the prosecution can't produce evidence of the drugs, they won't be able to prove a trafficking charge because, well, the drugs are sort of a critical part of proving that somebody trafficked drugs. So Bostick argues this wasn't voluntary, this was coercive. 2 armed officers blocking the aisle on a bus that's about to leave? Nobody feels free to leave in that situation. The trial court disagreed and believed that Bostick freely and voluntarily consented to the search. He appealed, the intermediate appellate court agreed with the trial court and ruled in favor of the prosecution once again. He appealed again, and this time the Florida Supreme Court stepped in to take a bold position, essentially saying that when police work the buses like this, boarding during scheduled stops and questioning passengers without suspicion, that's unconstitutional, period. They adopt what's called a per se rule. Per se just means automatically. They reasoned that a reasonable passenger on a bus wouldn't feel free to leave. There's nowhere to go. If you get off, you might miss your bus, lose your luggage, get stranded. So, according to the Florida Supreme Court, bus plus police plus questioning equals seizure, automatically. And if it's a seizure without reasonable suspicion, individualized to the person seized, then it's an unlawful search. So any evidence found is unlawfully obtained and, in the Florida Supreme Court's view, should not be allowed to be introduced in trial. The case gets appealed again, this time by the prosecution and to the U.S. Supreme Court, which has to resolve the question of whether every police encounter on a bus is automatically a seizure, or whether it should be evaluated the same way encounters in airports and train stations and on sidewalks are, in which the court has long since articulated by the time this case gets decided in 1991 was perfectly acceptable. Because here's the backdrop, and I've addressed this in previous videos in this same playlist that the Supreme Court had already said in earlier cases, that police are generally allowed to approach people in public, ask questions, request ID, ask for consent to search, as long as a reasonable person would feel free to leave. So in Bostick, the bus setting becomes the battlefield. Is there something about a bus that makes this fundamentally different? Is the confined space inherently coercive? Is the fact that the bus is on a schedule and about to depart, potentially with the person's luggage locked away on board, a key factor of constitutional significance? Or is it just another public place with tighter legroom and bathrooms that literally everybody can smell? You're obviously interested in understanding how law actually works, not just how TV pretends that it does. On this channel, I unpack criminal law topics like when police are legally allowed to stop somebody, clauses that can make your contract void or unenforceable, and business strategy to help you avoid piercing the corporate veil, all without the $200,000 law school tuition bill. So subscribe for more real cases, real strategy, and real legal drama. Alright, back to Bostick's trip, where the only good news is that he at least got arrested before having to drive through Jacksonville. Let's be honest for a second. You're on a bus. Two officers are standing over you. They're polite. They say you can refuse. They're still police officers. This is not your dentist asking you to floss more. This is law enforcement asking to open your bag right there in front of them. The Florida Supreme Court said a reasonable passenger would not feel free to leave, period. But the U.S. Supreme Court said free to leave might not actually be the right question. It is the right question in many places, like on the sidewalk where the rule was first defined in Terry v. Ohio, but Bostick wasn't really free to leave anyway. He chose to be on a bus that was about to depart pursuant to that schedule. His movement was restricted, yes, but by that bus schedule, not necessarily by the police. And that distinction becomes really everything for Bostick's case and this new wrinkle in Fourth Amendment jurisprudence. While the Florida Supreme Court focused on whether a reasonable bus passenger would feel free to leave, the majority of the U.S. Supreme Court justices said, and this is the key, Bostick wasn't trying to leave. He was trying to go to Atlanta. And the police didn't stop the bus. They didn't block the exit. They didn't confiscate his ticket. In fact, the police didn't have anything to do with the bus schedule at all. The bus was scheduled to depart whether police were there or not, so the court reframed the issue. In earlier Fourth Amendment cases like United States v. Mendenhall, the court developed the free to leave test. A seizure occurs if, in view of all the circumstances, a reasonable person would feel free they were not free to leave. This works for sidewalks and malls and even airport and bus terminals. But what if you're somewhere you wouldn't leave anyway? On a bus, on an airplane, in a movie theater, in a workplace during a shift. Your freedom of movement is already limited by circumstances you voluntarily chose. Generally, if you're at work, you don't just get up and walk off. You don't exit the airplane just after boarding as the door is about to close, and that has nothing to do with whether the police are present or not. So the court adjusts the language. Instead of asking, would a reasonable person feel free to leave, they ask, would a reasonable person feel free to decline the officer's requests or otherwise terminate the encounter? That's a subtle shift, but it has got massive implications, because now the focus isn't physical escape, it's psychological freedom. So the court rejects Florida's per se se rule. They say there is no per se rule that police questioning on buses equals a seizure. That is much too rigid a rule that is inconsistent with precedent. As was the case in every other decision, each case must be evaluated under the totality of the circumstances, which means courts look at, were weapons displayed? Was the tone the officers used threatening? Were exits blocked? Were commands given? Was the person's identification retained or returned to them? Was the person told they could refuse to answer? Context matters, environment matters, but environment alone does not equal coercion. That's the majority's position. In Bostick's case, the court emphasized the officers did not brandish weapons. They did not threaten Bostick. They did not block the aisle. They asked for consent. The trial court found that they informed him he could refuse. Under those facts, the court says, the encounter may have been consensual. And here's the important procedural point. The Supreme Court does not say the search was valid. Instead, they send the case back to the Florida courts. They say, apply the correct test, that free to decline test, not the automatic seizure rule. See, appellate courts are only able to review the record, often just a transcript, without being able to see or actually hear from the witnesses and evaluate their credibility. So the Supreme Court was limited in what it could actually determine, and it recognized this case needed more factual determinations to be made by the trial court. The rule that emerges for the rest of us to apply and follow moving forward is that police may approach individuals, even in confined spaces, and request consent to search without any reasonable suspicion, as long as a reasonable person would feel free to decline. Not free to run, free to say, no thank you. That's the line. And that line becomes extremely important in later cases. It's worth noting that not everyone on the court was convinced. Some justices worried this rule underestimates the real-world pressure of police encounters on buses. They argued that in such confined environments, authority feels amplified. But the majority held firm on their position. No automatic rule, no special bus exception. Just what they viewed to be a clarified totality of the circumstances test. And as a result, this case lives in the gray zone between theory and human psychology. In theory, if police politely ask you for consent, and you can say no, and they don't threaten you, your consent is voluntary. But in real life, uniforms carry authority. Badges signal power, and confined spaces can indeed amplify pressure. The majority acknowledges this, but says the Constitution doesn't forbid police from approaching citizens and asking questions. They've said as much in prior cases, where questioning in airports and factories wasn't automatically a seizure. The whole point is that it's about police conduct, not architecture or environment. If police can ask questions in an airport concourse or in a bus terminal, why not on the bus? That's the logic. So now we arrive at the final question. What does this mean for you as a citizen? For bus sweeps, for airport questioning, for police encounters in everyday life? Well, Florida v. Bostick didn't explode Fourth Amendment law or create some dramatic new doctrine. What it did was shift the battlefield from free to leave to free to decline. After Bostick, the key question in consensual encounters became, would a reasonable person feel free to decline the officer's requests or otherwise terminate the encounter? Not, could you physically walk away, but could you realistically say no? That matters. Because most police-citizen encounters today don't involve dramatic chases or handcuffs. They involve questions, requests, polite voices, and the word consent. Bostick strengthens the idea that consent can exist even in confined, authority-heavy environments, as long as officers don't cross certain lines. Legally, the test from Bostick is objective. What would a reasonable person feel free to do in this specific situation? Not what Bostick personally felt, not what you personally feel, a hypothetical, reasonable person. And that reasonable person is assumed to understand they can refuse, feel empowered to decline, not be intimidated by badges and authority unless overt coercion is present. Critics argue this standard underestimates real-world power dynamics, especially in crowded spaces. Supporters argue it preserves necessary law enforcement flexibility. Actually, that debate is still alive today, and I'd love to hear your position on it in the comments. After the Bostick decision, officers can board buses, approach passengers, ask questions, request consent to search, all without reasonable suspicion. As long as they don't block exits or brandish weapons or use commands instead of requests or retain identification in a coercive way or create circumstances where refusal seems impossible. The encounter must feel voluntary to a reasonable person under the totality of the circumstances. It's a soft line, but it's a line. Bostick becomes part of a broader line of cases defining the contours of the Fourth Amendment, including consent for police seizures and the reasonableness thereof. Consent becomes a powerful tool, because if an encounter is labeled consensual, the Fourth Amendment's protections aren't even triggered. Ultimately, Florida v. Bostick doesn't say police can coerce you, it doesn't say you have to consent, it says police are allowed to ask, and the Constitution assumes you are free to say no. Whether that assumption matches lived reality is a debate that continues in courtrooms, classrooms, and policy discussions nationwide. But doctrinally, the rule stands. Confined space alone does not make an encounter a seizure, nor does external pressure such as a bus schedule. The question is whether a reasonable person would feel free to decline. And that's the standard that governs countless encounters today, some of which are probably in progress right at this very moment. Next time you see officers boarding a bus or walking through a train car asking questions, you'll know what legal framework is operating in the background. Quiet, invisible, but decisive. Police don't actually need proof that you did something wrong to interact with you. This affects anyone walking, driving, or literally just existing in public, and it comes straight from how courts interpret the Fourth Amendment to the US Constitution. You're driving, normal day, nothing unusual, then out of nowhere, those